The three main narcissistic traits that you find in Muslim men, especially in cultures where women are expected to remain silent, is that number one, they use Islam selectively. So they will quote parts of the Quran and the Sunnah regarding the obedience of the husband from the wife, but they will ignore all of the verses in the hadith regarding how the man is meant to provide and protect his wife, how he's meant to be kind, soft, and gentle and loving, because these are the qualities of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they will use Islam as a weapon, not as a guide. And number two is
So, by selective evidence, the Quran does not command women to obey their husbands. The Sunnah of the Prophet does not demand women's obedience either. The Quran consistently emphasizes mutuality, kindness, fairness, tranquility, mercy, mutual consultation in marriage. That is the language of the Quran when it comes to marriage. There is no verse that says a wife must obey her husband in exchange for financial provision and protection. Nowhere in the Quran. Because he said men use selective evidence from the Quran and Sunnah. But the truth is this: the so-called evidence that these men use does not even exist in the Quran or the Sunnah to begin with. Because if he claims to critique selective use of evidence while ignoring that no such evidence exists, it is because he himself operates from the same patriarchal framework. To him, a man providing and protecting in exchange for female obedience is a morally acceptable arrangement. So, and that mindset already undermines women's individuality. Because according to him, a man that is demanding obedience from the wife should not ignore the fact that he is supposed to protect and provide. So to him, that such arrangement is morally acceptable because he himself operates from the same patriarchal framework that undermines women's autonomy and individuality. Yes, an autonomous woman anchored in her individuality is immune to abuse because abusers, including the narcissistic personality types he described, cannot control someone who thinks, chooses, and defines herself. So, but how can individuality flourish in a system that teaches women that their value lies in being dominated? Even subtle dominance, how can such a woman build a sense of individuality? So, the idea of obedience in exchange for provision and protection is unethical, period. And where does this obedience doctrine come from if it is not from the Quran and not from the Sunnah of the Prophet? The concept of unilateral female obedience is not Quranic. It comes from interpretive insertions into the Quran and selective hadith narrations. So male scholars historically interpreted Quranic verses through worldviews that already assumed male authority. So yes, male supremacy was read into the Quran, not extracted from it, because they lived in that society where male supremacy is a thing. So what they did was just to read patriarchy into the Quran. And you wonder why I said the Sunnah of the Prophet does not demand obedience from a woman, because you'll be like, but the Sunnah of the Prophet, is it not the Hadith? No, is it not the same Hadith that you said is where obedience to a man is derived from? The Sunnah of the Prophet is not Hadith. The Sunnah of the Prophet exists within the oceans of reports called Hadith. So not every Hadith represents the Sunnah of the Prophet. So we must not blur this distinction, as much as it is always convenient for people to use words to like just make a generalized statement. We are blurring distinctions in statements. So as Muslim women, we have that obligation to identify the Sunnah within the Hadith by measuring it against Quranic principles of justice, mercy, dignity, and equality. So how did patriarchy become religion? As I've said earlier, that the obedient wife doctrine comes primarily from Hadith literature, not from the Quran. I call them anti-female narrations anyways. And these narrations, they are very, very small, like they are very few, they are like very small cluster, but somehow they were amplified through institutionalized teachings. So religious institutions were built historically for hierarchy and social control, and these institutions magnified these few anti-female narrations coupled with juristic assumptions and interpretations till they produced a full system of male dominance that the Quran itself never mandated. So the three constructs that they used to assume male supremacy in Islam: selective hadith, juristic assumptions and interpretations, and institutional repetitions through institutional teachings. So these constructs were amplified enough that men and women now absorb them as divine decree. That is how communal misogyny takes root, and it explains the culture of female silence he mentioned in Muslim communities. So I want to say that Muslim women have tolerated abuse and internalized inferiority about themselves well enough in the name of God. So any statement claiming to address women's abuse must not blur these distinctions. A woman's obedience to a man is not a defined decree. It is not from God. It is not from Allah. We should not blur that distinctions for the sake of genuinity. Yes. And let me tell you the insidious part of a statement that most women will not catch, unfortunately. You see, the very arrangement he considers morally upright, that if men demand obedience from women, they should know they have to provide and protect in return. That itself is the breeding ground for abusive personalities he described. Male dominance, patriarchy, creates narcissistic personality disorders in men. So, because for his video, even abusive men who think they provide will like his message, because abusive men do not consider their behavior to be abusive, unfortunately, because they are so self-absorbed. He cannot subtly uphold male supremacy and condemn the abuse of women at the same time. You cannot preach, provide, and protect as authority, because that arrangement that he subtly upholds is the soil in which abuse grows. So, if anybody wants to talk about the plight of Muslim women, they should reinforce women's individuality, autonomy, and equal moral agency. They should reject interpretations that demand women's compliance or diminish their individuality in any sense. And I will say anything less than that is not justice. We have to dismantle the root cause of the abuse, the root where it stems from. We have to address that root. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section anyways. Bye.